Well, hello and welcome to the Quadruple D, a show within a show in the Critical Weight Theory podcast. And this is technically episode 71, part 2. And I'm talking about David Allen Trott as our peripheral poophead of the week. Now, who the hell is David Allen Trott, you might ask? Well, good question. I barely know who he is, and I just researched into him to make this episode. But this is proof that I don't just chase popular topics or talking points because who is David Allen Trott? Why am I talking about him? I don't know. Well, he was a politician, and we're going to get into some details here about why, even if you just look at some random politicians, you get an idea of how our system works. So, from an honest perspective, state politics is not a true arena of democratic representation, but a mechanism designed to protect private property, enforce elite hierarchy, and legitimize rule by capital. The political trajectory of Michigan's 11th Congressional District quite substantially illustrates how electoral transitions, whether switching parties or swapping individual representatives, appears to merely rotate the managers of capitalist state power. And the story of David Allen Trott fits right into this. While I would not say reform cannot be meaningful, some reforms can be good. I'm not going to say there's no point to them, but let's be honest about the limitations of reform within our system. Just look at some of the people involved in Haley Stevens' uh, region of Michigan, like David Trott. And that's why I'm actually getting into the character of David Trott and his legacy, if you will, because he represented the area that Haley Stevens represented. So before securing political office, Republican David Allen Trott amassed significant wealth by embedding himself within the capitalist legal apparatus. As the chairman and CEO of Trott and Trott PC. What a nice name, it just rolls off the tongue. Trott and Trott. Anyway, he headed a legal operation specializing in bank representation for bankruptcy litigation and homeowner foreclosures. So, pretty exciting stuff. Pretty exciting stuff. It's the type of resume that you look at and you just perk right up because it's such an exciting thing to read about. And he was his firm was labeled by critics as a foreclosure mill for its role in removing people from their homes through the state enforced sanctity of mortgage contracts. So my more radical analysis, if when I'm looking at this dynamic, the state uses its monopoly on violence like courts, sheriffs, and property laws to guarantee that financial institutions can strip individuals of housing, a fundamental human need, mind you, for the purposes of profit. And Trott expanded this financial empire through entities like Attorneys Title Agency LLC, Trott Recovery Services. Sounds like something you would have to do after going to, if you got diarrhea, you got to have a Trott recovery service. Anyway, that's my bad joke, I guess. You also have like Index, Dietz, Trott Sports and Entertainment, and partnerships in 23 energy companies. So a very corporate type of background with David Trott here. And Trott's political ascent was funded and engineered by established power structures. No big surprise there, because even though these politicians, these Republicans, often portray themselves as rebels of some type, they're actually pro establishment. They're perfectly aligned with power structures that represent elite interests, the power of money and the money of power. In September 2013, he declared his bid for Congress to unseat incumbent Kerry Bentivolio in the Republican primary. His campaign was championed by prominent establishment figures acting as co chairs, including former committeewoman Ronna Romney McDaniel, uh, you know, that one, and endorsements from capitalist advocacy groups like the U.S. Chamber of Commerce and the Michigan Chamber of Commerce, alongside over 250 officials. They've all further solidified his backing. Long before this run, Trott poured capital directly into the electoral system, serving as a major donor to the Republican National Committee and the presidential bids of Mitt Romney and John McCain, while also chairing the Oakland County Lincoln Day Dinner. So pretty exciting stuff. He's a rich guy doing rich guy stuff, and is part of the Rich Boy Club. And he was born in 1960. Trott's elite pedigree includes graduating from Cranbrook School in 1978, earning a bachelor's degree from the University of Michigan in 1981, and receiving his Juris Doctor from Duke University School of Law in 1985. Doesn't that sound like a rebel right there? Like a like somebody who's really in line with the people. I mean, to be fair, I have a degree as well, from the prestigious Finlandia University, a university that no longer even exists. Um, but I'm not trying to make fun of you if you have a degree, even if you're successful. You're expected to be all that, but you're not some obvious blatant rebel if you're doing all these things. If you're a career minded individual, you're probably not quite the source of maverick insight that so many of these Republicans will try to depict themselves as. And to be fair, this guy was actually a little bit before um, the true dumbing down of the Republican Party. This was before the McCain and what's her face Sarah Palin era, and this guy had success even before the George W. Bush era. So this was a little bit before things were severely dumbed down. I would say that even Ronald Reagan, even though he kind of got the ball rolling in the direction of dumbing things down, he at least had some vague conception of being dignified, and he at least tried to appear like he was reaching across the aisle and stuff like that. And um but now there's like barely any of that kind of stuff. And it's really interesting to just randomly look at somebody, some random politician, and see how much they clash with the modern era of politics, and also to see how they fit in too. So, even though Republicans constantly rail against universities as bastions of radical liberalism or whatever left wing politics, quite often they're plainly not that. And if you look at the types of people who graduate from them, quite often they're just trying to be career minded individuals like this guy was. And Trott's entry into government began locally on the Bingham Farms Village Council from 1987 to 1988. Over the years, he integrated himself into institutional governance boards, including the University of Michigan, Karmanos Cancer Institute, Detroit Country Day School. On My Own, I'm not really sure what that is. It must be like some sort of school program or something. And the Community House, and ran for the Oakland Community College Board of Trustees in 2012. So, this was somebody who, it's an example of a Republican not being an outsider or an underdog, but who wanted to be part of all sorts of different organizations, sort of in defiance of this constant right wing image of conservatives being renegades and mavericks, or, not at all being involved in these institutions. It's almost like they are actually conformists to some degree who cozy up to power to ladder climb as much as possible, like career professionals. And this guy wanted to have his imprint in a lot of different places. And, looks good on a resume. And hey, it might get you into a career as a politician. So you can represent your interests in that way. And you can represent the interests of other corporate savvy individuals. And that's exactly what happens. So Trott served 2 terms in the U.S. House of Representatives from 2015 to 2019 before leaving office and later identifying as an independent. Now, I don't know exactly what that means. Um, I'm probably never going to interview him or anything like that. But if he ever wants to reach out at me and clarify what exactly his positions are, I guess I'd be open to that. I think the chances of that happening are practically zero. But I'm open to that possibility, even though I've been a little bit snarky towards this guy. It's not like I have anything personally against him. I just get sick of this attitude that these Republicans are real outsiders or whatever. No, he was an insider, so much like a lot of these other Republicans, including Donald Trump. He's actually not a rebel. He is a conformist who represents the interests of the wealthy and the powerful, rather than the underdogs of society. And the shift from Republican control to Democrat Haley Stevens, if you think about it, that really only demonstrates how electoralism maintains the status quo. Stevens, a self described centrist and a corporate Democrat, replaced Trott after he declined to seek re election, and Stevens was backed heavily by corporate PACs and millions of dollars in outside spending from APAC affiliated groups like the United Democracy Project. So Stevens represents another wing of institutional authority. So while partisan rhetoric frames elections as deeply meaningful choices, a factual analysis shows that both figures relied on lobbyist money. They love state militarism, and corporate backing is used to maintain hierarchy for just some economic exploitation. That's primarily what they are there for. And the Democratic Party is more about providing some basic elements of a safety net as a form of revolution insurance so that the people don't get too desperate and too pissed off that they'll start a revolution from below. So that's why, you gotta dangle these promises in front of the people like you dangle a toy in front of a pet cat or a dog or something, and you get people to go along, and that's kind of what somebody like Haley Stevens is about. And then you got the Republicans who are sometimes somewhat on the same page when it comes to that sort of thing, although they're more in favor of not even giving the masses scraps off the table. They don't want us to have scraps or crumbs. They just want to strip us of all our resources unless we're like billionaires or maybe 100 millionaires. Let's be fair. I've often argued this. They will cater to you if you've got like some hundreds of millions of dollars. All right, so let's get past the stereotype that they're going to completely ignore you if you are below a billionaire status. They'll pay attention a little bit if you got a few 100 million. Let's be fair. Anyway, that's it for this episode. I'm not even going to include an image of this Trott guy because nobody cares about him that much. They're not going to be like, where's that picture of David Allen Trott? Like nobody's going to be upset that I don't have that here. This is just an audio only episode, and that's all I have to say. Like and subscribe. Um, I'm going to record another one of these tomorrow. where I will be talking about John McCain and his biggest scandal, or one of his biggest scandals anyway. I mean, you could pick a different one, but this is one of the ones that people most remember. Anyway, have a good one.